I was a young man then, riding high on testosterone, rum, and nicotine. A living Goliath wouldn't have stood a chance, let alone these imps or ghosts. It was the last year of my master's, and our room stood perched on the 7th floor of the boys' hostel. The only French window of the room opened to an infinite view of barren farmlands and arid hills. Surprisingly, there were no metal grills outside of this window, making it a smooth but fatal escape straight down to rutted concrete. An exercise that we would later contemplate. As roommates, Brady, Avi, and I had bonded well over the past years or so. It was perhaps because we kept much to ourselves and had an unspoken regard for each other's insecurities. Brady was feisty by nature, always on the go. He was short and nimble on his feet, witty and very articulate. He kept a similar company of intellect. I don't remember an occasion when he stepped out ill-groomed or in a pair of unpolished shoes. His ability to look relaxed all the time was something that I really admired. It felt as if he was heedless, yet in control of everything at the same time. At the end of the day, he found solace in us because we were lesser. We respected that, and he enjoyed that gratification. Avi, on the contrary, was more of a gentle giant. Physically, he was larger than us, and with silky, free-flowing hair, he was better the material that Bollywood heroes are made of. He had a significantly lighter complexion that made him easily decipherable, as his skin tone would give it away. He would perspire and turn pink when upset or angry, and appear normal and settle otherwise. I don't think he was aware of this, so he would always smile back at us irrespective of his mood. In his best defense, most of the time he would be attending to his then lady love and come back to the room sometimes happy and sometimes sorrowful. We would never dwell into the rhymes or reasons. It was just the usual insignificant banter, perhaps followed by a film and then hitting the bed. And that was enough to hold us together admirably well. The room was almost a square. Let's divide it into two halves, left and the right. The entrance opened to the right, followed immediately by a study table and then my cot. On the left side of the room was Avi's bed, placing diagonally opposite to mine, another study table, and then Prattie's. A gap of about 4 feet separated the two sides, and at the end was the French window almost touching the edges of Prattie's and my bed. It was Friday of a late humid evening in July. The monsoons were just at the outset. It used to be damp and groggy throughout the days, but cooler in the evenings. We would keep the window open for the breeze to drift in freely. Not even in my most sensible moments could I have imagined how that evening was to unfold. Tired and bored of the ongoings through the day, I was the first one to retire to my room, soon followed by Pratty. Our lazy chit-chat flowed from classic rock to origins of Italian giallo cinema, eventually leading us to decide to catch up on a film after dinner. It had probably just got past 11 when Pratty and I finished supper and came back to the room. The film we chose was cliché, just relentless gore and macabre. We had still not started when Avi walked in, hiding behind his usual smile. To us, it was apparent that he was distressed about something, and he immediately fizzled onto his bed. When asked if he would like to join us for the film, he politely denied, but with a request for us to switch the lights down and keep the volumes as low as possible. He stretched the blanket right over his face and seemed inert without a challenge. His girlfriend must be giving him a tough time. We sneered and let him to his self. It must have been around 2 in the morning when Praddy and I finally drifted off to our beds. The only light that remained in that grisly room was from a reading lamp that stood over a pile of dust on the study table at my end. The warm and sticky air had now turned into a gentle breeze. It whistled through the nearby trees and took the falling leaves with it. I almost wafted into a slumber when I felt a growing change in the serenity. Something was trying to tear through the calmness of that brisk night. Slowly, but insistently. As if ripping apart a piece of paper, bit by bit. Someone was grunting in rage, and it was growing. I opened my eyes and sat up. There was absolutely nothing. One could even hear a pin drop. I had no idea of what I had heard, or perhaps it was just a delusion of my own mind. Sitting on my bed, I glanced out of the window to try and reason things out. As the wind beat the drapes back at me, that was when it echoed again, much heavier and more rapid. It sounded as if one had been clasped and clinched down to the ground, with chains and shackles that were trying to break free from some kind of inexorable agony. In those brief seconds of realization, I gathered that whatever it was perhaps not even a few feet away from the back of my neck. I turned around. My eyes followed the throw of light and landed on Avi, who resembled a corpse wrapped up in shroud inside a morgue freezer. It took me a few seconds to realize that his chest was pounding like a steam engine, and it was his breathing that ominously rebounded between those 4 solitary walls. This had woken up Praddy as well. While my gaze was still transfixed upon Avi, as I tried to draw sense out of the situation, at that exact point in time, with a huge twitch, Avi sat up on his bed. His legs lay flat, parallel to the ground, and his back was straight, at an absolute right angle. His glossy hair was dripping with sweat. The next few moments, he just sat there, frozen and exhaling copiously, gaping into an infinite oblivion. It felt he was in some sort of a remote control, anticipating his next command. Then, without moving an inch of the rest of his body, he turned his head towards me. In that mellow gleam of the reading light that propelled right across his face, I saw an appearance that still hovers across my vision like a bad omen. Those dreamy eyes were now shot in red, and that radiant skin had turned pale, whiter than the purest white. I'm not sure what analogy to give, as neither had I seen or have seen anything like that ever since. And then, suddenly, with all his might gathered, he stood up with his arms outstretched. With a howl of resounding anger, he ascended towards me, as if he was the god who had seen the devil. Or perhaps the other way around. There is no way to tell. Brady, who sat in a frenzy all this while, was chilled to his bones on being a witness to this. I had lost my ability to think clearly and jumped right across to his bed. Avi, or whatever had gone into him, didn't seem distracted by the movement as he routed himself towards both of us. It felt as if his innocent soul had gathered an equally powerful devilry. With his arms frozen and drained of all color, his eyes oozing blood, and his jaw knitted with grit and pain, he took the last few steps towards us, snorting and grumbling in fury. I don't think our screams even made out of our throats. All of Brady's cleverness and my drunken revelry merged at a dead end for once, as we stood immobile on the cusp of our favorite French window. Without a hitch of a thought, the only thing we could consider were the permutations between life and death if we leaped out. Perhaps we would land on the next window, or maybe on the other one. It all sounded more probable than surviving this invincible threat that menaced upon us. As Avi's finger reached our gullets, so did my foot out of the window ledge. We did not have a choice. He stared straight into our eyes, devoid of all emotions and know-how. The next few moments are still a blur. Our innumerable minds woke to an abrupt thump as Avi's entire frame collapsed on the floor, like a chunk of stodgy, boneless meat. He just lay there, right in front of us, limp and lifeless. We did not move. We didn't even try. After coming to terms of what had just passed us, we huddled over and towed him to the corridor outside our room. We sat in silence through the dead of the night that remained. Avi broke into tears and cried profusely. I'm still not sure why though. In between, he mumbled about the unpleasant voices from that gruesome film and how it might have driven him subconsciously. I don't think anything meant much at that moment. Our brains were probably numb enough to process words or phrases. It was close to 5 a.m, and dawn had just started to break. We lumbered towards our beds like motorized figurines that had just run out of battery. Far away over the distant hills, thick grey clouds had started to settle in. I could see through the window. A change in seasons, I thought, and closed my eyes. That was the last of Avi that we all saw. He was nowhere to be found when we woke up, and hasn't been. For about 20 years now, and perhaps never will be. I do not know. Irrespective of what happened that night and why, his last words remain etched in my memory. how those grisly noises from the film could have driven that act of sheer lunacy. It was possible, perhaps, yes, for fear to manifest in the mind without one even realizing its existence. But then again, that night, there was neither a film nor any forbidden sounds, as Praddy and I had later decided against the idea. Recalling that moment today is much the same as watching Avi walk into our room. Concealed behind that smile, his only defense that we thought was always so inconsequential and vulnerable.